Hello, namaskar to everybody. Good morning to our friends in North America, and good afternoon to our friends in Europe, and good evening and late good evening to our friends in Taiwan, Japan, Australia. I am Vijay Kranti. I'm chairman of Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement. Uh, Today we are organizing this uh, webinar on forcible organ harvesting in China. In the beginning, I'll give you a very short introduction to the organizers group, and then our honored speakers, and then we'll start with the presentation of our speakers. The two organizers are Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement and Tibetan Youth Congress. This Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement is a think tank based in New Delhi, which is focused on understanding issues which are impacting countries and societies in and around the Himalayan region. And it's a platform for exchange of uh, views, of knowledge, perspectives among uh, experts from various parts of the world. And then we have experts, researchers, writers who join and who have special interests in political, social, economic, and strategic developments in this region. Tibetan Youth Congress, as we all know, is the largest socio-political group of Tibetan refugee community across the world, and it is the leading organization engaged in the struggle for Tibetan people for the restoration of complete independence of Tibet from China. And over the years, TYC has evolved as the largest and most active non-violent, non-governmental organization of Tibetan diaspora, and it has emerged as the nursery of social, political, and cultural leadership of Tibetan diaspora. If you see the list of the previous Tibetan prime ministers, presidents, parliamentarians, judges, scholars, uh, and social workers, social leaders, uh, you don't be surprised that you find that almost all of them have graduated through working with the Tibetan Youth Congress. And we have with us today three very learned speakers, and I'll introduce them. Of course, not in order of the way they are going to speak. We have Dr. Enver Tohti Bugtha. He is a trained and a practicing medical doctor. Before he was compelled to quit his country, East Turkestan, under China's colonial control, he worked for 13 years with the Railway Central Hospital in Urumqi, which is the capital of East Turkestan, as a surgical oncologist. He graduated from the Shiezi Medical University, and he is now settled in London. It was his contact with the British film crew which made him aware of the connection between the disproportionate high malignant tumor, which was very prevalent in Xinjiang. Its relation with the nuclear test in Lupnor in Xinjiang. So he participated in making a documentary film about these victims, but as a result, he came into limelight and he was compelled to quit People's Republic of China, and he took asylum in UK, and now he is settled in London. He works for actively for and participates in international conferences and presentations before international bodies about the situation inside occupied East Turkestan, and especially on issues like the impact of nuclear explosions there and the organ harvesting. Because on one occasion, when one prisoner was executed by the Chinese police, he was ordered to remove his organs to be transported somewhere. And that was the time he realized that this horrible business of organ transplant organ harvesting from human bodies was going on. So these days he's engaged in this campaign across the world. We have Dr. Ethan Gutmann. Ethan is an American writer, researcher, author, and a senior research fellow in China studies at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. And he has investigated surveillance and organ harvesting in China quite extensively. He is known for his detailed and research studies on abuse of organ transplant in India. He is a co-founder of the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, and he's a uh, uh, he's a fellow at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. He has written, I think, at least two books. The one book is Losing the New China, a story of American commerce. And the other book is Desire and Betrayal of the Slaughter, Mass Killings, Organ Harvesting, and China's Secret Solution to its Dissident Problem. Welcome, Ethan, to this show. And then we have our another speaker, Jennifer Zeng, who is a very dynamic speaker and a very famous TV anchor. She presents her own show, YouTube channel, which is called Inconvenient Truths by Jennifer Zeng. And she aims at offering authentic, fastest, uncensored, first-hand information from inside China, as well as unique in-depth analysis and insights about China's current affairs and politics. She also runs her website, jenniferzengblog.com. If you are interested, you can go and see it. The jenniferzengblog.com. And she has been working in the media industry as a journalist, editor, news producer, news director, columnist, and TV show since 2001. So, welcome, Jennifer, to this discussion today.
Thank you.
And we'll be very shortly joined by Professor Ayushi Ketkar. She is an expert in international relations and security studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, and also Sonam Tsering, who is the General Secretary of Tibetan Youth Congress. So this is time to start, and I will request our friend Ethan Gutmann to please start. I'm sure because Ethan has an appointment with a doctor today, and I requested him specially not to miss today's show. So he was very kind in agreeing to it. And in spite of this time pressure, he agreed to join. Thank you very much, Ethan. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vijay. And I really want to thank the other organizations that have played a role here for keeping this issue alive and in the public eye and bringing it to new audiences. This is really key, and it's always a very hopeful moment for me when I feel I'm speaking to some people who haven't heard much about this before. I will give away part of the end here, which is that there is, for the first time this year, we are finally seeing a concerted and strong response from the medical community, the global medical community, particularly among transplant surgeons around the world. And I'd really like for India to be part of that very much. So, in other words, the tenacity that everyone here, Jennifer and Enver Tohti have displayed for so many years is very important, because unfortunately these things can take a lot of time before they get worked out. So that tenacity is important. And it's particularly important because the majority of the victims of state-sponsored organ harvesting have changed over the years. From majority, the majority was gone. It's gone from Falun Gong, Tibetans, House Christians, to Uyghurs, maybe a few, not very many, but some Kazakhs, possibly some Kyrgyz, and maybe even Hui. The overall picture of China's transplant industry, though, is one of continuity above all. And I hope I can make that clear in my remarks today. Now, I'm going to push aside definitions of what constitutes genocide. This is a big debate in America and UK and in Europe. Today, I simply want to concentrate on recent evidence that has been established or confirmed by my own field research. I don't really want to diverge very much from that. It's up to you to process these facts and decide if I'm credible or not, and that's fine. You're perfectly entitled to do that. But you need to decide for yourself if the Western medical world's position, or its position up until this last year, which was essentially neutral but clearly responsive to Chinese sensitivities, is that sustainable over time? Is that the way for the world to go? And then, so specifically, to make you think about that, I'll provide a very brief timeline of the transplant abuse issue. I will focus on one case study, what I call the organ harvesting cluster in Aksu. This is a prefecture in Xinjiang in northwest China. And I will finally give you estimates culled from my recent refugee testimony to provide the scale of mass murder as we know it. Now, I know you have ideas and questions of your own. I would welcome them hearing from you if I were not going to this doctor's appointment. But I'm sure that Jennifer and Enver can take all kinds of questions too. And I certainly know when me and Enver have spoken together at, I don't know, you name the continent, we've done it. And we're like brothers, or as he calls us, two wolves in the same valley. So at any rate, here's what we know. I'll keep my remarks short and to the point. Here's what we really know. In the late 1980s, Chinese organ harvesting of executed prisoners, which was before that was experimental, it became routine. So you could remove kidneys, maybe a liver from executed prisoners. And there are a lot of executed prisoners in the 1980s in China. In 1994, we have the first report of live organ harvesting in the Urumqi area, that's Enver's area, of Xinjiang. Okay, and that was done by a guard, who I call Nijat, that's his name, and he was a Uyghur in an all Chinese, Han Chinese unit, and he went to he claims he didn't see this, but they had executions. That was one of their main jobs, was to go out and execute people, and he clearly had taken part in some executions. Anyway, somebody came back and said that there was somebody screaming from one of the medical vans. And he said, "What do you mean screaming? Like they were alive?" And he said, "What did the scream sound like?" And the Chinese, his friend, said they sounded like they were coming from hell. So this is the first sign we have of organs being taken out while the prisoners were still alive. In 1995, Dr. Enver Tohti, who is here tonight, he was ordered to extract kidneys and a liver from a live prisoner in the Western Mountain execution ground. 1997, following the Gulja massacre, Uyghur political and religious prisoners were harvested on a small scale on behalf of high-ranking Chinese Communist Party cadres in Gulja and Urumqi. Now we have this as direct evidence from people who took blood from political prisoners in Urumqi. We have a nurse who worked in Gulja Hospital and described following this, and they were very aware this was happening, but they were very small scale. We're talking about 6, maybe 12 people. It's not huge. This is done on very top level Chinese Communist Party officials. And we could see that, that kind of transplant abuse that had moved from regular prisoners to political prisoners or religious prisoners could have ended there, but it did not. In 1999, the Falun Gong persecution is ordered by Jiang Zemin, the recently departed Jiang Zemin. and it begins. It is a fierce crackdown, and in 2001, and I estimate at that point you have approximately 2 million Falun Gong in China's Laogai system. This is based on witnesses, and many witnesses who I've spoken to, and I was able to kind of make some numbers out of that. I never took anybody's. I was interested in their personal position within the Laogai system, within the camp. I wasn't interested in their overall estimates because they weren't capable of making those. But putting together different people's estimates from different camps or detention centers, one can come up with a number like this. So you've got approximately 2 million. Now, at that point, during that period in 2001, Falun Gong prisoners were being singled out for retail organs only examinations. What do I mean by that? The simplest way of describing that is an eye examination. So they would be given an eye examination, which basically consisted of a lot of light being shined into the eyes. But there's no vision test. So there's no corresponding test of peripheral vision, focus, anything. And the reason for that is because these doctors are simply interested in the corneas. The corneas are a tissue, they're not an organ, but they can be sold. They're worth about 15 to 30,000 each if they're healthy. And so there was interest in getting those corneas. Now, obviously, the other tests were fairly clear too. They were blood tests, extended blood tests, and usually a kind of a probing test, EKG, and a urine test usually. And these put together, you would start to get a fairly good idea of the health of the various organs. And these, nothing else. In other words, you do the retail organs examination, but you wouldn't do test on anything. You weren't testing for actual health. You were testing for the health of the specific organs. I hope people have followed me here. Now, in 2002, the wait times for foreign organ tourists, that is people coming from Germany or Japan or America even, were reported to be 2 weeks or less. In other words, you could get an organ that quickly. In fact, there are cases a few years later of people getting emergency liver transplants within 4 hours. In other words, a person goes into crisis, they come into the hospital, 4 hours later, they have a new liver. Now, obviously, this is impossible unless you have a pool of people. You cannot do this by creating traffic accidents. You have to have a pool of people who are waiting to be killed on demand. And that is one of the strongest pieces of evidence. There's a lot of others. There were a lot of phone calls that were made. I'll get to that in a second. But in 2003, this may be of particular interest, for the first time, incarcerated Tibetans and house Christians, a much smaller amount of house Christians, start to receive retail organs only examinations. Now, this is absolutely established. My research partner, Georgia Gibson, went to Dharamsala, interviewed a lot of Tibetans, and they came back describing how entire monasteries were cleared out. The monks were driven hundreds of miles, actually, to a very modern hospital where they were examined for their organs, and then only a certain amount came back. Now, we have no sense of the real numbers there. We just know that it happened, and we know that there was not good medical facilities in Tibet initially, but that changed over time. So I would say Lhasa probably has some very good medical facilities right now. The house Christians, a smaller number, but it was mainly Eastern Lightning house Christians. But they definitely, at one point, only Falun Gong and Eastern Lightning were receiving examinations in certain camps. In 2007, the Chinese medical establishment claimed that they were performing 10,000 transplants a year. Remember that number. It's important. In fact, the explosive growth of transplant centers throughout all the Chinese provinces suggests that the transplant volume was significantly higher and that this number was simply a placeholder. In 2012, individual Chinese hospital numbers were revealed. And this was a book that was follow-up to The Slaughter and also to David Kilgore and David Mattis's work in Bloody Harvest, where we were able to show that they were actually performing at a minimum 60,000 transplants per year, at a minimum, probably more like 100,000. At the time, they were still claiming to do 10,000. Now, I think we proved that pretty definitively. We went through, we had a lot of great researchers working for us, and they did almost a superhuman effort pulling out the numbers from everywhere. I mean, Nurses Weekly, dissertations, all kinds of sources to get to those numbers so that we could see how much was really going on. In fact, we found that a couple of hospitals could do, a couple of hospitals put together, like 2 or 3, could do 10,000 transplants. So, for example, Tianjin and Beijing 305 we're doing together. We're almost doing 10,000 transplants right there. And then we've got all these other Chinese provinces. And if you put it all together, it was a very, very high number. Now, in 2014, something really odd happens, which is Chinese police start entering Falun Gong homes to take blood and DNA samples compatible with tissue typing, cross-matching, as we call it. So in other words, you're checking out, you want to be able to make a match between the person who's receiving the organ and the victim who's going to have the organ extracted. And what we found was this was very unusual, because up till then, this was always being done in the camps. But all of a sudden, they're coming into people's homes. These are people who haven't really done anything wrong. Even by Chinese standards, they really haven't done anything wrong. They just are Falun Gong. They're not in trouble at this point. But they're getting these exams. Now, I originally thought that was just a scare tactic. I was wrong. In fact, they were beginning to run out of Falun Gong in the camps, or at least at the right ages, which they preferred. I'll get to that shortly. At the same time, by this point, we recruit a series of phone calls. This was done by Falun Gong practitioners themselves, who would call up and pretend to be looking for an organ for their uncle or their aunt or their mother or whatever. And they would kind of lead the conversation with these hospitals, and they'd sort of say, do you have any Falun Gong? I've heard those are the best organs. They're very healthy people, so they do these very healthy exercises. And in many cases, the doctor or a nurse would come back and say, yeah, we have those. We have Falun Gong. All of the ones that all the organs are of this type. Please come in and we'll talk about it. Now, that was never perfectly definitive proof, because if you know China, and I've lived there for years, I lived there for some years, and there is a tendency to Chinese to make a deal. They'll say, do you want midgets? I've got midgets, whatever you need. But in this case, when you put it together with these other facts, it was impossible to see that prisoners, that is hardcore prisoners, murderers, rapists, and so on, thieves, could be making up these kinds of numbers of 60,000 to 100,000 organs transplanted per year. Well, now part of that is that the Chinese are now using 2 to 3 organs out of each individual, probably not just one. And the transportation system has gotten much better, and the hospitals can cater to a lot of people simultaneously. So some of that can be explained, but not all of it at all. And by 2015, the Chinese transplant industry claimed to the West that it stopped using prisoners as an organ source. Okay, they're talking not about Falun Gong. They're not talking about Uyghurs. They're talking about murderers, rapists, and so forth. Okay, this was completely undermined by their own, the Chinese transplant industry's communications to Chinese internal audiences. In other words, in their own newspapers, they were saying, well, no, prisoners can still volunteer their organs. Okay, just they've got to fill out the right paperwork. Now, that further claimed that they were using voluntary organ donations, which is what they started to say, was like, okay, well, we're not using prisoners, but we're using voluntary organ donations from, families and good-hearted people or people at the end of their lives and so forth. That was exposed as just statistical hoax. The growth in voluntary donations was actually based on a simple equation that was exposed by Matthew Robertson, who's been a real veteran of this field, and Dr. Jacob Levy, a profoundly important heart surgeon in Israel. They showed that this was a perfect parabolic curve just trying to show that these voluntary donations were going up, which is impossible in real life. Now, in 2016, Beijing shifts, and they forced 10 million Uyghurs to give blood samples compatible with DNA and tissue typing. These were called health checks. But the fact is, the Han Chinese were exempt from these health checks, these medical tests. And it's also true that none of my witnesses received any follow-up medical treatment at all. So in other words, they weren't really checking out your health or going to let you know if you had diabetes. They were simply creating a database of approximately 10 million people. In other words, every Uyghur above the age of 12, and some Kazakhs as well. Now, in 2017, camps were constructed in Xinjiang. They were capable of holding over 1 million prisoners. This is mainly Uyghurs and some Kazakhs, so a little bit of Kyrgyz, and possibly some Hui, but not a lot of them. But they were given, if you were in those camps, you were given bi-monthly health checks. These are compatible, again, with cross-matching for organs. In 2017, fast lanes for human organs, green passageways, appear in Xinjiang airports. And here is where I do wish I had a slide to show you, but I think it's a little easier just for you to listen to me here. So this is actually a arrow pointed on the ground, which says human organ fast lane, okay? And they're only going out of these Uyghur cities. They're not going in. You're not bringing organs in. You're taking organs out to the rest of China. And what are they doing? What are those organs doing? They're following the money. And the money is in the East Coast hospitals because the big people, the people who really pay the big money, the Gulf state sheiks and so forth, the top flight people from Japan or Germany and so forth, maybe some Russians, they go to the hospitals they're comfortable with. That would be in Shenzhen. That would be in Beijing. That would be in Shanghai or Guangzhou. Now, in 2018, an order is given to construct 9 crematoriums in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. And we really need to pay some, I always need to give some special thanks to Gulchera Hoja of Radio Free Asia, who came up with that and called me the minute she had that information. This was really shocking stuff. The first completed crematorium is in Urumqi, and it hired 50 Chinese security guards. Salary $1,200 US dollars per month. That's extraordinary salary for that region of the country. And have you ever heard of a crematorium with 50 security guards? In fact, this is one of the things you've only read about in the Holocaust. Now, we know that there's 9 of them, and I'll get back to one of them in a minute as well. Now, in 2020, field research in Central Asia that I did is used to create an estimate of annual transplant volume. And I'll come back to that shortly. Now, let's move on from the timeline. I mentioned a case study, specifically an organ harvesting cluster in Aksu, Xinjiang. Now, satellite photos of that area are a little hard to interpret, but we can say a couple of things. What we have is in one very small area, we have 2 re-education camps. One is for 16,000 people. The other one is for 33,000 people. Within the camp that has 33,000 people, inside it, we have the Aksu Infection Hospital. Now that was built before the camps. So in other words, they built the larger camp around the Aksu Infection Hospital. And then we have to the north, we have one here, and then to the north, we have a crematorium. And all of these things I've just described are within close walking distance of each other. Everything is less than 1 kilometer away. Now, the configuration of a prison attached to a hospital is not new in Chinese history. We've seen several cases of this during the high-intensity period of Falun Gong harvesting and in several provinces. Yet we've never seen a similar all-inclusive cluster like Aksu, especially not firmly established in Xinjiang or what Uyghurs prefer we call East Turkestan. Now, at the risk of going too far into the weeds here, I interviewed two witnesses in Turkey, and I believe their testimony is quite germane here. And I wasn't even interviewing them about organ harvesting. I was talking to them about forced labor. But the first interview is from a Uyghur male who was in and out of the Aksu prison system from 1998 to 2004. And he establishes that the first local prison camp construction began in 2013. That was approximately a 5-minute drive from the current Aksu compound. He also establishes that the Aksu Infection Hospital was originally used for SARS virus patients. Okay, so we're going back in time here. In 2013, the hospital evolved into a treatment center for religious or extreme Muslim dissidents. So Aksu Infection Hospital essentially became a re-education hospital. And as we know from Ms. Hoja's personal research last year, this is Gulchera Hoja again, the Aksu Infection Hospital actually performs transplant surgery. Now, I showed them a picture of the crematorium, and that facility was familiar to this witness. He said, pointed out that seen from the road, it has a prominent sign. He said the air smells like scorched bones. And he was aware of this for many years. He always assumed the scent was from Chinese bodies because Han Chinese prefer to be cremated while Uyghurs do not. Now, the second interview, conducted also in Turkey, is from a Uyghur male, also from the Aksu area. This man drove by the crematorium nearly every day. He identified it as such. He also mentioned a strong, noxious odor coming from the crematorium, and it was said it was a common complaint among residents and workers in the area. Therefore, even though we didn't see visible smokestacks, the scent from the crematorium suggests that it does not use a water-based method, as I initially theorized, but a burn method. This is intense heat, filtration, and presumably to keep any smoke at a minimum, a reburner. Now, the burn process is 8 times faster than any other method that we know of, really. And I cannot give you numbers at this time, but it is fair to say that the potential crematorium volume of that crematorium in Aksu is significantly higher than we previously understood. Now, the final factor is that the road to Aksu Airport from the crematorium or from the transplant hospital is less than half an hour to reach the airport. And the Aksu Airport actually does have international capability. Now, it doesn't take super big planes, but it takes planes that could easily fly a bunch of organs to Saudi Arabia or any other country you like. The Green Passage, yes, they have one in the Aksu Airport. It's essentially a very important person lane for human organ export to transplant hospitals, probably mostly near the Chinese coast. Again, one way only. And finally, I believe we found the end user, at least one of the end users, which is First Hospital, Zhejiang Province. This is a hospital not that far from Shanghai. And beginning in 2017, this is at the height of the Uyghur, when the Uyghurs are really being brought into the concentration camps, liver transplants increased by 90%. Well, kidney transplants increased by over 200%. First Hospital is also one of China's 10 certified ECMO training centers. Perhaps Enver will talk a little bit more about ECMO to you as well. ECMO is used for live organ harvesting, and it can be used to double or triple the viability time of an organ before it is transplanted. On March 1st, 2020, First Hospital, which we've been discussing, successfully performed the first double lung transplant on a COVID patient. This was an advertisement. They made a big splashy story out of this in China, and they put it in English in every China Daily, everything else. It was basically an advertisement for foreign organ tourists that even during the COVID-19 pandemic, First Hospital was open for business. All right. But what is the scale? Well, one witness is on the next slide that I would normally show you, and that's Saryagul. But I'll just describe her. Saryagul is a middle-aged woman who was caught up in the camps. And she was teaching Chinese in her camp. And following, she had access to a makeshift access lounge, faculty lounge. And following a camp-wide health check, they held them every 2 to 3 months in her camp. A list with health results would come back a couple of days later. Next to 3 of the names, there was a pink check mark. Now, these people who had the pink check mark would disappear over the next 10 days in the middle of the night. And I asked her why. And she just simply said organ harvesting. Now, to generate numbers, we need to turn to witnesses. We need to do something of what I did with Falun Gong, where I came out with a figure of 65,000 Falun Gong harvested from 2001 to 2008. Now, I believe that number tripled over time, but I'm going to leave it there, that was a number I was very secure in. And I'm starting to run out of time, so let me summarize this. Look, there are 2 kinds of people who leave the concentration camps of Xinjiang, who are let go, if you like. The first are young people, they're about 18 years old on average. The announcement that they're graduating is usually made during lunch, and they're going to be exploited for their labor in a factory out east. The second group is aged between 25 to 35. In fact, the average age is usually 28 years old. That is the exact stage of physical development that the Chinese medical establishment prefers for organ harvesting. And these people are taken in the middle of the night, and you are not supposed to mention them again. They are unpeople. They do not, they are never talked about. It's extremely dangerous to talk about them. Now, based on witness testimony from approximately 20 camps, 20 completely different camps, I should add, the average estimate was remarkably consistent, between 2.5% to 5% annual disappearances for this age group. Okay, therefore, if we're saying there are 1 million Uyghurs in the camps, my estimate is that 25,000 to 50,000 Uyghurs, average age 28 years old, are being harvested for their organs every year. I want to conclude with a remark about skepticism, because I'm not going to go further. I told you I'm not going to talk about genocide. I'm not going to accuse the Chinese of genocide. I think this is maybe what we call maintenance genocide. This is an attempt to wipe out a people. If China gets into a serious war with India, with Taiwan, I think I believe the Uyghurs will be finished. I believe the crematoriums will be going 24/7. But that's not happening yet. So let's just go here. Let's stick with what we have. And let me conclude with this remarks about skepticism. First of all, it's a very valuable tool. I came into this investigation back in 2005, 2006, with a very skeptical attitude. But I think it's also fair to point out that most skeptical questions that I've heard regarding Chinese organ harvesting recently are questions that asked in some form when were asked in some form when the Holocaust was going. That does not make this the Holocaust. But like the Holocaust, it means the human nature and a simple aversion to horror may be at play. It also means there is resistance to the evidence, particularly from those in fields that are tangentially complicit. That would be transplant surgery and medical export equipment. China journalism, which relies on friendly access to the Chinese Communist Party. Belt and Road initiatives, states such as Pakistan. And of course, we all watched as the World Health Organization lied and made excuses for China's cover-ups during the COVID pandemic because of a short-term political calculus. So make no mistake, this will always be a tough issue. I suspect we will never uncover a final solution document from China. That means we have no shortcuts. We must follow the evidence, and some of the most critical and compelling evidence comes from witnesses, not Chinese documents. And, Beijing dismisses Uyghur and Kazakh witnesses as propaganda actors. Well, you're going to listen to 2 of those actors tonight because Jennifer is Falun Gong and Enver Tohti is a Uyghur, okay? But I know that's not true. And I've imagined many of you have worked with refugees, or at least know some refugees. And so I'm not sure you'd agree with Beijing on that point either, but that's up to you. I want to just say it's a privilege to speak to you tonight. I think maybe there are ways to contact me. You can, they're not that easy, but I'm on Facebook. So if you want to friend me, I'm happy to have new friends. And please feel free to contact me with any leads that you might have. or ways that I can help you, or simply if you want to talk. Thank you very much. I'm afraid I have my own medical troubles tonight. I have to go after them. Appreciate it again, and I'll sign off there. Thank you. Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you very much, Ethan, for giving a wonderful background and sensitizing all of us and our audience on the quantum of this problem and the background to this problem. When I was giving introduction, I deliberately had to quickly shift to you simply because you have a medical appointment today. And of course, you have done a lot of my work, but still, uh, I will thank you because uh, not only you have given background, you have, uh, I would say, flattened the ground for play of our next two speakers. So thank you
Okay.
very much. And I'm sure we'll meet again. And I wish you everything
Sure
good
we
in
will.
your health. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much,
And
Vijay.
so at any
Enver,
stage, if you
Jennifer,
want to, yeah,
I'll say good night. Night,
right.
Pat.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. So, when I started this introduction of this issue, I had one special slide for you to show, uh, but then I thought, let Ethan first speak. May I request our friend Losnala to put my slide on the ground on the screen. This is one visual which I picked up while going through the material on forced human organ harvesting process which is going on in China. And it was so shocking. This visual is a bit old. This is not the latest one, where the rates of human organs have been presented in American dollars. You can see it's cornea, 30,000 American dollars, lungs for 150,000 and 270,000 US dollars. Then there are heart available, liver available, kidneys available. So this is, and pancreas also available for sale. Is unfortunately this is you can see some advertisements of the Chinese hospitals, because these figures we picked up from a Chinese official medical website. And after this was picked up and it became popular, uh, the Chinese government was very quick to remove it, but it still exists on the net. Uh, this shows that there is a business going on in today's China, and the people behind this business are not ordinary people, not hospitals only, not doctors only. It is the senior officers of Chinese Communist Party, the People's Liberation Army, who control the business in India, the business in China, and especially the business which goes on in hospitals, which is an underground business of organ sale of organs. And these organs, as Ethan told us, they are harvested from living people, and those people, a large majority of them are Uyghurs. And once their organs are taken out, they are sent for transplant in those hospitals in China, who invite patients from across the world, telling them that it is easiest to get these the uh, the organs of which match their own blood and body system, and also they are the cheapest. And in addition to that, these organs are flown out to other countries. And at one point, I realized that in Gulf countries, they are advertised as halal organs. So this is something very shocking. I won't use the word interesting. It's shocking that human organs being sold as halal organs to attract clients in the Gulf countries. But there are many details. I will not go into those details. We have now with us a doctor, Dr. Enver Tohti, who himself is a practicing doctor. He is an Uyghur. He was educated in a Chinese medical institute in East Turkestan, which China calls Xinjiang. He was a practicing doctor with the railway hospital in Urumqi. He worked there 13 years. He has been studying the impact of nuclear explosion in Xinjiang area of Lopnor, which has become very quite well known across the world. So he studied the impact of nuclear testing on the health of local people, and then he came to know of this organ business, because at one stage he told me that once a prisoner was executed, and then he was, as a doctor surgeon, he was ordered to remove some organs of that the executed person. And it was at that time Enver realized the business which was going on at the cost of his own country people. So that made him interested, but all this put him into trouble and he had to escape. So now he lives in London, and he is fighting for not only for the freedom of his lost country, East Turkestan, he is also fighting for the human rights of the people of uh, East Turkestan, Tibet, South Mongolia, and the citizens of China itself. So I leave the floor to Anwar. Anwar, please make your presentation.
Thank you very much. What a great introduction. Well, there's something I wanted to correct that I only realized there's something organ harvesting going on. It's that I have already come to United Kingdom. Then I realized that, well, it takes quite a long time. So where's my, oh yes, okay. Well, um, I'm trying to tell you how I understood what made me to questioning what is happening is that there are medical paper published in Chinese medical journals, and it tells you that they can get you an organ in as short as 1 week time, and in emergency cases, it can be done in 4 hours time, and sometimes you can get one for second free, and even you can choose donor. That kind of business pattern, you actually only expect it from that merchandise business, not from this human or medical field or human organs stuff. But since you have seen it on this medical stuff in the hospitals, then what you understood is this is business now. It has been turned into business. Those kind of information for untrained eyes, and it doesn't really make sense because they don't know. But for the medically trained personnel, they immediately the question will be raised: how can you get an organ in 1 week time? How can you get an organ in 4 weeks, 4 hours time? This is, you see, when this question raised, and you see, China is a closed country. You can't make your own investigation. Then the things left to you is to make your own educated guess. So let us imagine you go to a lobster restaurant or fish restaurant, and you want to eat fish. And this restaurant, in order to provide you fresh fish, they will, they will keep those fish alive in a huge tank. The human organ, it is the same, because human organ is not like the meat you buy from the supermarket and they put into freezer. You can eat 10 years later. Human organs is not. It has time to lose its functions. Human organ, it is for its functions. So if they can achieve get you an organ in a 1 week time or 4 hours time, that is to say they have a huge pool of organs. And since organs cannot be stored for a long time, then only logical explanation is they have huge pool or stable where they kept unlimited or unknown number of people waiting to be taken, the organ to be taken. You see, this is in April 2006 in one of the Chinese province called Hunan province. And it says, because they want to advertise their business, they give away 20 liver and kidneys for free. Who can achieve that? So I come across with this organ things as can be traced back to 1990 when I was in the outpatient department of Rimchi Railway Hospital. There was a we were middle-aged man who took his teenager son and come to ask me to examine his son that if there's an organ missing. And I said, what made you to think in this way? And he said, in the Rimchi County, there's rumor in the air that not only rumor, it's true that when the teenager have gone lost, missing, and after they have been found after 3 months, they found that there's the organs missing. So I examined his son, and I didn't find any scar on his body. So I told him, I said, don't worry, nobody can steal your son's organ without leaving a scar. So he was happy, left. And by the time he went back to his village, he spread this news. He said that he told others there is a surgeon who speaks Uyghur, and the Uyghur surgeon. And for the next 6 months, I have seen more than 100 kids. And 3 of them, they had scar on their body. So I sent them to ultrasound for examination, and the ultrasound reported back saying 1 kidney missing. That was the first time I come across the organ stealing or organ pillage or organ black market. That is back to 1990. Then in 1995, I got an order from my chief surgeon and went to an execution ground and removed a liver and 2 kidneys. Then all just didn't actually made me think there's something wrong with it, because we were born into that society, and we believed that everything in that society was great. So we thought, if you are condemned to death, then if we take your organ, it's normal. There's nothing wrong with it. That is our mindset. Of course, after I come to this country and I started realizing that what was going on, and that things happened in back home, it is a hideous crime, and it is crime against humanity. So since then, I joined with Ethan, and we started campaigning this. What's my point and main point is to tell you these things happening, because there's evidence happening. And have a look at these three pictures. The left one is in Urumqi, and the middle one is in Aksu, and the right one is in Qinghai province. And all of them, they marked in the same writings. It says, look, this one has English, special passenger and a human organ transport channel. One, you will wonder, if you are at a airport and you see such sign, and you will immediately think, this city is exporting human organs, and the traffic of these human organs is high. Otherwise, they don't need this special pathway. Since they needed special pathway, giving special pathway, it means that the number of this organ transportation is high. Then, if we use human common sense, we will come to understanding that this city must have large population, because must have a lot donor. That makes this city can export organs, human organs. But in reality, those three pictures we can see is one is Qinghai and two is in Xinjiang. And Qinghai and Xinjiang is the scarcely populated province of China. Then you will set in the catch-22 how scarcely populated province can export large number of organs, because you don't have answer. You got your mind turn around and said, how? Then that explains that in 2016, Chinese government, they carried out that checkup in Xinjiang. So all Uyghur people, they have been forced to have the blood samples taken away. And as they said, it is for the health checkup. In reality, it's not, because as Ethan pointed out, after the blood sample being taken, nobody come back to tell you you have diabetes. No, nobody. And that we suspect they are building this human organ database, online database. This is one. No, this is Can we play video? No, we can't. Okay, just one slide. I lost one slide. This also is video. We can't play it. That is really pity. Okay. Can I just pause for a few seconds? Sorry about that. I'm suffering from this flu. Many people ask me, how come this kind of hideous crime can take place in China? And I said, you look at yourself if you understand Chinese. Because people in China, they grow up in that society, and they believe whatever they have been told is correct. And when they come to these things, they don't realize this is a kind of hideous crime against humanity. They don't realize that. This is one very good example. And this is in 2008 in city Kunming. There are 6 surgeons has written a medical paper and published in a medical journal, and it says about an organ transplantation. Just let me read this for you. When the donor brought into the theater, and the general anesthetist has been used, applied. That is to say, this donor was alive, and they put general anesthesia. So to make surgery. So if this is a kidney transplantation, then this will be okay, because I can sell one kidney and then take money and go home. But this operation is 2 cases of heart and lungs combined transplantation. This article didn't tell you after they took the heart and the lungs and what happened to the donor, because donor was alive. They took these organs and gave it to somebody else, and they didn't tell you what happened to that. So this is an indication that they have taken the execution into the medical theater. And since they have done a lot, they couldn't even realize they are telling the world what they are doing. There is a Chinese website, and is that organ donor, voluntarily organ donor registration website. And on that website, I just made a screenshot, but I couldn't add it to this. Until today, yesterday, the registered donor, potential donor is 5 million, more than 5 million. Let us compare with United Kingdom. United Kingdom has population of 60 million around, and registered donor is 24 million. Based on the 24 million population potential donor, you have to wait for 2 years to get an organ. But China population is 14 billion, 1,400,000,000. And the registered donor is only 5 million. And then based on such a small number, and how can you get this organ in 1 week, 2 weeks time? So this big, huge gap between the organ transplantation surgery carried out and the actual just legal potential legal donors number is the gap is too big. You cannot answer how this is happening. And I had a friend, he died 2 years ago. After he died, I could reveal to the world that just rich Muslims, I don't say which country, but rich Muslims, they registered with the brokers in their own country and they pay them. Then they will receive a letter from the embassy in Beijing. Then they take that letter, come to Urumqi to have organ transplantation. And that is halal organs. We don't really have words to describe this Chinese Communist Party they are doing to their own citizens if they consider Uyghur people or minority their own citizens. We can't have enough words to describe it. What I can say is that how this Chinese government trap other powerful personnel, that it used to say, if we want to get him work for you, one is money, you give him a lot of money. Secondly, or you offer a pretty girl. So that is called money trap and the honey trap. But if that personnel, he has more money than the money you can offer, money trap doesn't work. And also if that person, his own mistress is more prettier than you offered, the honey trap will not work too. But if you offer organs, that is, I don't think that anybody on earth for now can resist that kind of offer. And that is the harsh reality that our campaigning couldn't actually reach where we want it to be. And we can still see that many people being sent to the death row or theater where human beings' life should be saved, but they lost their life at the theater because their organs is much more valuable than their own life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ethan. You touched so many points, and especially this point is very touching, that human organs are placed, orders are placed by rich people. You have not named the country, but we have been hearing, and I, as moderator of this discussion, would not be unfair to all Muslim countries. So what I read is that in some of the Gulf countries, which are very rich countries, there orders are placed for specific organs with specific blood profiling, and then those orders are sent to Beijing, and then Beijing takes out those organs from either Falun Gong practitioners or from the Uyghurs or the prisoner Tibetans. We don't know, but that is a practice which is going on, and it's a shame for not only for China. I think this is a shame for entire humanity, and it's a challenge to people like me and you, that we know about it, and we are helpless in stopping it. But unfortunately, leave aside stopping, we are not in a position to even make the world aware of this heinous crime which is going on at official levels in a country called China. Anyhow, thank you very much. And we have a guest who is expert in sending this message across the world, who has been working very hard for years, and he has been discussing this issue in details, doing her own research and presenting facts in a very convincing way to her audience. And we have here Jennifer Zeng, who is a very famous, as I said earlier, she's a famous uh, TV show anchor. She has her own YouTube channel. So, Jennifer Zeng, we would love to hear from you your perspective on this issue. Jennifer Zeng, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the previous two speakers' wonderful presentation. I'd like maybe to add a little bit more about my personal experience and personal story, because that is very much related to our topic today. I basically was born in 1966 in China, Sichuan province. That was the year when the Cultural Revolution started. So I grew up in China. I was admitted by one of the top university in China, that is Peking University. So I studied 7 years there. I gained a Master of Science. And then after I graduated, I worked for the highest level government consultant and a policy research body, which is called the Development Research Center of the State Council. I was actually wrote a speech for the then Chinese Premier Li Peng for him to read in the United Nations. Then I worked for a financial consultant company. And so basically in 1992, when I gave birth to my daughter, I encountered a medical incident. I lost a lot of blood. I almost died. And then through blood transfusion, I caught hepatitis C. At that stage, it was an incurable disease. So I lied in hospital, and my health was totally ruined. I couldn't work. I couldn't look after my daughter for years. Then in 1997, through my family, I was exposed to Falun Gong, which is a meditation practice based on 3 principles to follow in your daily life, which are truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. So I read the books and I thought it was very good. So I diligently do the exercises for 1 month. And as if by miracle, through an annual physical examination, I found my hepatitis C was gone, and I could feel that I was full of energy again. I totally recovered with my disease, so I left the hospital. I went back to work. And I remember that was the happiest time during my whole life, because I was able to regain my health, my vitality, and everything. So I, of course, such a wonderful practice, I continued to practice it. And then in 1999, that was the year I think the CCP realized that there were more Falun Gong practitioners than the Chinese Communist Party members. So they conducted a survey, and their estimation was there were 70 to 100 million people practicing Falun Gong. I think it's because just what happened to me because of its very obvious health benefits, and because it's free of charge. It never charges money for you to learn. You can download all the material from the website by yourself. You can just go to a park and find people doing it. You can join them. You can learn for free. So that's, I think, was the reason why it spread so fast. So in 1999, the then CCP head Jiang Zemin, who just passed away, I think, in November 30th. So he decided to crack down on Falun Gong because he felt threatened by the sheer number of it, although Falun Gong didn't have any political agenda. So after that, I was arrested 4 times and then sent to Beijing female labor camp for 1 year. I was almost tortured to death in that labor camp. So while I was there, because I experienced and witnessed so many inhumane tragedies happening around me, so I made a very strong determination. I must survive all this so that I can tell my story to the world. So it was such a struggle, and I think no human being would ever imagine how I struggled and what I experienced to be able to survive all the torture and then escape out of China, so that I can tell my story. So if you are interested in what happened to our day-to-day life in the labor camp, I have already written a memoir of what's happening in the labor camp, which is called Witnessing History, One Woman's Fight for Freedom and Falun Gong. So you can search on my website. There's an about page about my stories and links to where you can purchase a copy of my book. So I won't go to details of what I experienced in the labor camp. Anyway, I was able to escape China in 2001. So I sought asylum in Australia, and I was granted refugee status. So I became an Australian citizen in 2006. So the first time I heard about the organ harvest issue was exactly in 2006. The first report came out in the Chinese edition of the Epoch Times. It was very short, but it was very shocking. Basically, the report says thousands of people were detained in a hospital called Sujiatun Hospital in northeast China, and they were killed while they are still alive, so that their organs could be sold for high price, for a lot of money. Although I experienced so much torture, so much, I witnessed people driven to madness, to insanity. I witnessed people killed in the detention center and in the labor camp. But I thought I saw the worst thing of the persecution. But when I read the report of they are killing living people for their organs, that was still too much for me. So subconsciously, I refused to accept the fact, because it was just out of my ability to process and to accept this kind of shocking fact or shocking allegation. So although I didn't want to say I didn't believe in this report, because it came from a paper I trust very much, but somehow I subconsciously resisted to accept this. So I started to picking up the problems in a report, because as a journalist I said, oh, you should have give more details, you should have done better before you present such a shocking allegations without any more details here and there. I started to picking up problems in that report. And the next day, the same paper published an interview with a lady who gave herself a false name Annie. And she talked about, actually the first story was revealed by her, but without mentioning her name. And on the following day, they did a follow-up story. And so she talked in her hospital, which is Shujiatun Hospital. She said 6,000 people were Falun Gong practitioners. Falun Gong practitioners were held in the underground facilities, and during the past 2 years, her husband was a surgeon, was a doctor, and he personally, and he was especially responsible to remove the cornea of the Falun Gong practitioners. And her husband had personally conducted removal of eye cornea from over 2,000 Falun Gong practitioners. There are other doctors responsible to remove other parts of the body. And somehow one day her husband found that the body was still alive. So he couldn't handle the pressure. So he somehow one day he confessed this to her. And also there were other, things, strange things, like she found hundreds of thousands of US dollars in cash at her home, and her husband had a problem explaining where those cash come from. And then one day her husband was, I think, couldn't handle the mental pressure, so he confessed these things to her. And then she realized, because she also worked in the same hospital as administrative personnel, so she was in charge of buying supplies for the hospital. So she realized how much food she needs to buy. So she calculated. There were initially 6,000 people in the underground, and then during the past 2 years, 2,000 of them got killed, but there were still 4,000 alive in the underground facility. So she managed to escape, and she exposed the shocking fact to the world, so that those 4,000 practitioners in the underground facility could be saved. So that was the second story. When I read that story, I started crying, because the details she gave remind me of my own story. I wrote in my book, I knew exactly how many numbers of Falun Gong practitioners are there in the camp on the day when I was released. That was 984 people in the labor camp. Why do I know such an exact number? Because I was detained in the same room as those. They have a cooking squad who were taken. They were also prisoners or personnel in the labor camp. So they were taken to the labor camp canteen. So they were responsible for cooking for the people. So in order to prepare food, so they were given an exact number of how many people were there. So this kind of detail, I had to admit what this lady said is true. Then I realized my own experience of getting repeated physical exam when I was in the detention center in the labor camp. Actually, on the day when I was transferred from the detention center to the labor camp, that was June 1st, 2000. On the way we were transferred, we were not directly taken to the labor camp. We were taken to a clinic to undergo a physical checkups. Like what Ethan said, they check our corneas, they check our eyes, they have a doctor listening to our heartbeats, they had our lie down on the bed, they touch our livers, and there was a doctor actually integrate our medical history. And I want actually at that stage to convince him that Falun Gong is good. It cured my hepatitis C. So I told him I had hepatitis C, but through practicing Falun Gong, I recovered my health and this and that. And he carefully wrote down everything I told him in my file. But I innocently thought it was just a normal physical checkups as a routine procedure before we were sent to the labor camp. So I didn't think much. So again, in the labor camp, I think that was about after 1 month when we were there. And suddenly one day, a bus arrived at the hospital, at the labor camp. That was very unusual, and every one of us we were handcuffed with one pair of handcuffs. Two of us were handcuffed together, and we were, I think, dozens of us were pushed into that one bus. And what's very strange, they put curtains on all the windows of the bus, so we couldn't see anything outside. So because there were so many of us, there weren't enough seats for us. So for the extra people, we have to squat either in the space between the two rows of seats, or between the two rows of seats. So I was forced to squat down between the two rows of seats, and I had to lay my head on the legs of the people who was sitting. And imagine, it was very hot summer, July or October, August. It was the hottest season in Beijing, and they didn't open the window, and all the opens were blackout. So we were like a sardine fish in a black box. We were taken in this black box to a huge hospital outside the labor camp, which I estimated was 30 minutes away from the labor camp. And this time we were given more thorough physical examination, including X-ray. I remember very well, they gave us X-ray to check our lung status, and then we're taken back in the same condition with that big black box in that bus back to the labor camp. And then sometime after that, we were actually given a blood test inside the labor camp. They had a room in the labor camp, and we were taken them once, maybe 3 of us or 4 of us were called by our name, so they led us to there and had our blood drawn, and then we're escorted back to our building. So that was inside the labor camp, about maybe after another month. So altogether, I was given 3 times of physical checkups. Like Ethan said, we were never shown the results of the medical tests. And because every day the torture and the forced labor was so heavy, so the only thought on my mind, I was only capable of thinking, how can I survive another day? Or how can I finish my quota today? Or can I have 1 more minute of sleep today? So all day long, my mind was occupied with that. And we were not given enough sleep. Sometimes we had to work overnight so that our products can catch the plane for the next day. So at that time, I didn't have the ability or the space in my mind to figure why, on the one hand, they torture us to death, but on the other hand, they spend so much money, so much effort to check our physical status. And of course, there was another rule inside the labor camp where we were not allowed to talk to each other, and we were not allowed to keep record of each other's numbers, and we were not allowed to try to contact each other after we were released. And when we were released, they gave so thorough checks through all our bodies to try to make sure we didn't take any one single piece of paper that will have anything written on it, so that we have no so this kind of regulation make it impossible at all for us to try to check the status of the fellow prisoners in the labor camp. We had no method at all to check whether they are still alive or dead. So whenever something disappeared from the labor camp, we only assumed that she got released. So although I personally experienced these physical checkups, this blood test, but during the time when I was in the labor camp, I never thought about the purpose of the physical checkups. Like I said, my mind was too occupied with all the other mental struggles. But I do remember, and once the police officer threatened us, if you don't reform, by the reform, they mean they want us to give up our belief in Falun Gong. They want to transform us. They want us to say, oh, the Falun Gong is so evil, we will never practice it again. We were, follow the party's order after we were released. So that's a procedure we have to go through in the labor camp. And the police were given a quota. They had to transform or reform at least 95% of the Falun Gong practitioners that are there. If they didn't achieve the goal, they would be fired, or they would lose the money, they would lose their bonus. That's why they torture us to death, and they encourage the other real criminals there to torture us as much as they can to get us reformed. So we were threatened by the police. If you don't reform, we will send you to a place in northwest China, and once you are there, never dream about coming back. I thought that was just a threat, but of course, many years ago, when I read the first report of the organ harvesting, and then shortly after that, I read another report from a Western media saying there was a very huge labor camp in western in the west north of China, maybe in Xinjiang area, where they had 50,000 people detained there. So then I realized the police, when she threatened to send us there, she did mean it, and she knew once we were sent there, we would never be get back, because that must be meant we would become a victim of organ harvesting. So up to today, I still have no idea whether it was because my admission to the doctor that I had hepatitis C that saved my life, or just it happened my blood wasn't matched during my 1 year stay in the Beijing female labor camp. So shortly after that, I remember very another experience very I think impressed me very much was the Australia ABC TV station. They are going to do a program about organ harvesting. So they got a phone recording, which, like Ethan mentioned, they have some investigators pretending they are a family member of whoever needs an organ, and they have them call the doctors in the Chinese hospitals to talk about it. So they recorded the phone conversation, and then they transcribe, all the conversation are translated into English. So the Australia ABC TV was given a phone recording and the transcript of the conversations. So because they don't understand Chinese, they want to match the sound bite or the voice recording with the transcript. So they asked me to help. So I listened to many of the conversations in the whole. So because I understand the language, I could feel how true the phone calls are, because the investigator, obviously he wanted to get the doctor to admit on record that they are doing organ transplant and they do have Falun Gong practitioners' organs. But the doctors, I could hear their very complicated mental process. On the one hand, they are very careful that they don't be trapped into something like unreal, but on the other hand, they don't want to lose a business if this is really someone who need an organ. So you could feel the mental process and battling among these two sides who are making the phone calls. And finally, the doctor was convinced that this is a real customer, and he finally admitted, yes, they do have Falun Gong practitioners. So I listened to, it's a very long process of arguing and trying to convince each other and trying to outsmart the other part. So that the intriguing and complicated process, you can't just fake that, because I understand the language. So I was so shocked, and I was more convinced by the authentic of this phone recording, because it can't just be faked up. And also, actually, there was a doctor. His voice was very, very special, because he spoke in a very special way. And later on, the CCP actually produced a propaganda TV show, want to have him to say, oh, he didn't, admit that they have Falun Gong in that phone conversation, that was fake. But during the TV program, if you listen to his voice, it's exactly the same voice, and the way of his spokes is exactly in that telephone recording. So this is from another way the Chinese Communist Party, they admitted by themselves, one, this is a doctor in that hospital. One, it's the same person. If you understand his language, even if you don't understand his language, you can hear it's the exactly same voice. So I think there are tons of evidence to show that this is happening. This has been happening. Eva talked about a little about their so-called donor system. I did a similar calculation by myself, actually, using the number from the United States, because I'm right now in the United States. Initially, the CCP didn't admit that they're using dead prisoners' organs, because that was against the value of Western community. And then because they couldn't explain where do the organ come from, even if they only do 10,000 organ transplant, they still had a problem explaining where their organs come from. Then they had to admit, yes, they have been using these prisoners. And then suddenly in 2015, they said, oh, now we understand using these prisoners' organs are not good. So we are now having donor system. Like Eva said, they have only $5 million in their system. Even if this number is true, it still can't sustain so many organ transplant. I did a similar calculation of the so-called conversion virtue, like how many transplant you are doing, and you can divide it by how many donors you are in your system. Like in the United States, they have the total population in United States is 300 million something, and all of those, 1/3 of them, that was 100 million people were in the donor system. They are willing to donate the organ if they die in an accident. But in America, there are only some 30,000 organ transplants in the whole year out of $100 million in that system. So if you do the same math with the Chinese, it's hundreds or thousands of times higher than America's. How come China can do 10,000, or like Ethan said, the actual number could be 60 to 100,000 organ transplant per year out of only 5 million is the current number. Several years ago, there were only 300,000 in that system. How can you conduct so many organ transplant out of that small, very, very small number of donors? So in whatever angle, they just cannot sustain their lies. They are putting lies to cover up our lies, and then more lies to cover up another lies. But this, like I said, this so-called donor system is also only a crime laundry system. They put up all their numbers are fake, and even if their fake numbers cannot sustain their actual organ transplant, they are still doing every single year. So if we put if it's a very simple math. If they are doing 100,000 transplants per year, and the organ transplant number jumped after the persecution of Falun Gong in 1999, which is still going on today. And then we have millions of Uyghurs also got, in the camp, in the labor camp system. So if you use the number of 1 year plus 20 some years, so that is millions of people got killed during this organ transplant industry. Millions of people. I don't know what more evil crime do we need to stop the CCP from doing this? Actually, right now, 3 weeks ago, I just do a new program called Vanished. Right now, because I talk about 2 cases of high school students just disappeared. One called, I think, one was in a school. He was a boarding school in the high school in Jiangxi province, and suddenly one day he suddenly disappeared from his school, and up to now it's over a month and no trace of him at all. And there was another case in Wuhan city, also a 14-year-old boy. His mom asked him to dump the rubbish downstairs, and then he went downstairs, dumped rubbish, and then disappeared. And then several days later, his body was found maybe 16 kilometers away from his home. And when his father rushed there, the police officer refused for his father actually to get close to his body, to check his body. So that's just 1 month. This is two very high-profile story because they spread it in the Chinese internet, and then people start to share how many cases of children got lost in their they know. So in one very small little county, dozens of children get missing during 1 month, and we several years ago we also heard stories of 30 more university students went missing from Wuhan University. That was the city, of course, where the COVID happened. So these kind of story are popping up right now. So my fear is, although they've been systematically taking organs from Falun Gong practitioners from Uyghurs, from Tibetans, house Christians who were detained, but because the industry has exploded, the capacity has exploded, and they still don't have enough organs. And if you want organs from the labor camp system, you must be inside the system. You must be an officer of the labor camp system or the hospital, or you have to be in the state system. So, but because the profit was so huge, so there must be somebody outside of the system who don't have the state power, but who also want to make the money. So their only way they can do it is to kidnap somebody, some kids from the school or on the street when he was going out to throw the rabbit. So there must be underground, like mafia kind of organization also involving in this, like the picture Eva just showed right now. Some family found his children got lost, and then several days later they found their bodies in a box full of ice. I think they are using ice to try to make his organs fresh. So my fear is now ordinary Chinese people can also become victims of this heinous, never heard of crime in the human world. So if we don't stop this, I don't know how many more people would die. And I want to emphasize that, one, without the help from the Western medical community, like the doctors, were almost all of them, especially in the very first early stage, were trained by Western hospitals, Western universities. Without the help or the support of the Western community, and without the huge number of customers coming from all kinds of countries, this kind of industry would not be developed to where it is today. So I think I understand many people don't want to accept this is a fact, because like myself, I didn't want to accept it, because the minute you accept this is happening, everyone is immediately faced with a moral challenge. If this is happening, what you should do as a fellow human being when your fellow human being were killed for their organs. Many people are not, I think, prepared to take up this challenge, and so they'd rather try not to believe or pretend to not know him. But my question is, if we don't stop this, are we still worthy of calling us a human being still? So that's my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Um, your personal experience, how you went through the labor camp, and especially the issue you have raised. I was actually going to ask a question to our panelists, that when patients, either from a Gulf country or from America or Germany or any rich country of the West, if they are sent to China, or if the organs for the patient are imported from China, there is no reason to believe that the doctors, the hospital institutions who are dealing with the patient, either the doctors or a hospital who are recommending their own patient to go to China and get transplant, or those who are ordering uh, human organs from China and transplanting in their patients in their own institutions. I fail to realize that these experts or the institutions in the West, they don't understand the reality behind it. And it is very unfortunate we don't hear any complaint from any big hospitals or any big governments from across the world that this is what is happening. So, would you, if I ask you, the morality of the medical science community and administration community of the Western hospitals or hospitals in Gulf, aren't they responsible, or aren't they expected to be more responsible and come out with truth? How do you look at it? Dr. Anwar, let us start from you. Your sound is mute, please.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, thank you for your question. Your question is it's slightly long. Let me give you a little more background stuff what we heard. As I pointed out during my presentation, I said an organ cannot live longer outside the human body. So that makes this organ exporting in two ways, only two ways. One is you come to China to have your organ transplanted, or Chinese they deliver organ to your country. The first one is easy to understand, but second one is little complicated, because how can you transport this organ? As Ethan pointed out, using ECMO machine to connect to the organs, then transport this to the country where you live for your convenience. That requires some expertise, some engineers, and it costs more money. There's another way of doing it, is just take this potential donor alive, send it to the country where you are, and then taking this donor's organ at the theater and then making this a donor just passed away in the theater, then it's gone. To my experience and in my opinion, I believe the second one is much more feasible for the Chinese. It's not only me, there are a few others also has said similar thing. There's a rumor, of course, I can't verify this. There's rumor that there's a small country in not far from United States. Then there's charter or charter airplane flying in out from China to that small island quite frequently. And they suspect they are delivering organs to that island. The recipients, we don't know who. They also come to that small island. So that in this way, it is very secured. It is you can't find out how. And the very recent speculation saying that when Xi Jinping visited Saudi Arabia, and the speculation says that he took the organ transplantation surgeons from Beijing 301 hospitals with him, and together with two young men. One source says these two young men, they are Uyghur, but another source didn't say they are Uyghur. Anyway, it doesn't matter Uyghur or not, but they are Chinese citizens. But the speculation said they delivered this to the Saudi king. And when the Saudi king going to have the surgery, we don't know. And we don't even can verify if this story is true or false. The reason is that there are so many speculation in China is that China they take control of everything. So the Chinese state media, the information given on Chinese state media, none of them are true. So that made Chinese people speculate everything, just like conspiracy theory. And unfortunately, many Chinese state affair or politics being leaked by the conspiracy theory comes to be true. I cannot say it's 100% true, but many of them are true. Only confirmed years later that was true. So when we're dealing with China, first of all, you see, there's in the West and the China, there's two different concepts. In the West, they assume you are innocent before find guilty. But in China, that is another way. They always assume you are guilty before find you are innocent. So, because I come from China, so I know this mentality. So I rather choose to believe this story. But I'm not going to spread this story, but I'm going to believe this story for my own use, for the future reference to use. That's one thing. There's another thing is that Chinese, they have made a project, China Project 2025, a few years ago. In one of the sector in this project, it says they are going to deliver human organs to the world. When I saw that, yeah, of course, now they have taken this away. When I saw that, and I said, how are you going to deliver these organs? I want to see. Because an organs can live up to 10 hours, but one flight from Beijing to London is 12 hours. How can you do that? Apart from you are taking this life donor with you. Or if the recipient come to China, then it is not you are delivering an organ to the world. You see, that is this things. When we're dealing with China, we need some professional eyes and ears to connect those dots and using this to alarm the international community that China, it is a hideous regime on earth. And allowing Chinese Communist Party exists and to operate, to rule so many people, it is crime of the world. We should stop them.
Yeah. So the second part of question, Jennifer, can I ask you? There is a very highly respected health body, WHO, who is responsible not for the health of people, even is also responsible for the ethics involved in health delivery to ordinary citizens. Do you think WHO has played its role responsibly?
No, I don't think so. I think especially with the COVID pandemic, we all see that, especially in the beginning stage, the WHO totally follow the CCP's narrative or the CCP's orders about how to describe the pandemic. When the CCP said, "Oh, it's not human to human," the WHO followed their narrative, and that
Yeah.
delays the world for weeks, and
Yes.
for the world to lost the most important time window where it's still possible to contain this. So that I think lead to the deaths of so many millions of people in the world. So in that kind of sense, I don't think the WHO has played its role. It has to pay it, and up to till now, it still has not been able to even get I think something like a decent investigations upon what's happening during the COVID, or what happened during in the first stage of Wuhan, how it started, how it got spread, and nobody is talking about holding the CCP for covering up the pandemic and caused the outbreak in the entire world. And for the organ transplant, I think a crime, or organ harvesting people, a crime. I think the world definitely hasn't done enough. The international, I think, medical community, like the international, I think there's an organ transplant society, even I think held their annual meeting in Hong Kong that was endorsing the CCP's transplant industry. They invited a lot of experts, and after the CCP said, "Oh, we've set up a donation system. Now we have this computer system, and so everything is good in China." And the experts and they went to China. They were invited to maybe visit one of their computing system, like how they match the organs with the recipients, and they endorsed it by saying, "Oh, their system is so advanced," etc., that sort of thing. And some doctors, especially when the crime was first exposed, or even blame Falun Gong practitioners for exposing this crime, saying, "Oh, you are tarnish the name of organ transplant. We are doing lofty, business to save people's lives, and you are spreading this kind of story to tarnish our names." So they are actually angry with being this kind of story being exposed. I think everyone in the world, they have their own interest. For the transplant doctors, maybe being able to do good, surgeries and make a living or make a career out of this, it's their achievement. And especially with the technology, advancement, we can do more, and we can maybe handle with more complicated cases. We can save more lives. So that's their achievement. So if you say, "Oh, there's something wrong," I'm not saying many of all of them, but maybe many of them would feel reluctant because they will put their own career maybe in jeopardy or something. But of course, there are doctors, like one in Israel. He is the one, I think, of Levi. No, sorry, I forgot his name. But anyway, one of his patients told him, because he was waiting for a heart in Israel for a year, but couldn't get it. And one day, his patient suddenly told him, "Oh, I've got a organ transplant scheduled on such and such a day, and so I'm flying to Shanghai to conduct the surgery." And when he heard that, he was so shocked. How can you schedule a heart transplant? Because and Ever already said, a heart can't survive after leave the body after maybe several hours. So how can you know on which day someone will accidentally die and he will happen to match you? The chance maybe was so thin that it couldn't happen in many of years. So that's why he waited for 1 year in Israel. It never happened. Anyway, so initially this doctor didn't believe it, but then his patient really flew to Shanghai and really got his heart transplant on that specific day. So after that he found there must be something terribly wrong. So he did his own research and he found, yes, this is happening. So he was able to promote uh, uh, to to uh, to promote to this a new law passed in Israel, where one, if you go to China to conduct organ transplant, you will not be covered by the insurance, or it could be a criminal crime or something like that. So I think if the doctors and if the governments really want to stop this, at least they can pass similar laws. Like one, if you go to China to buy an organ, your medical insurance or your medical expenses will not be covered, because after they conduct the transplant, they will need to take medicine to, I think, subdue the reaction from their own antibody system for the rest of their life. So that's a huge expense. And two, you can also stimulate that anyone who go to China to conduct organ harvesting, it's equal to killing someone on your behalf. So it's a criminal offense if you go. So in that kind of circumstances, I think that will stop many people from going. But of course, we all know that there are so many crimes in this world. They all come from, either the pursuit to money, to power, to women. So if there is this huge, profit producing from this industry, there will be people want to risk whatever they can risk to make this huge money. So if good people don't fight hard enough, we can't, stop those evil people.
Oh, thank you very much. I think this is time to conclude, although we could have gone still ahead for more points, because this is not the end of questions. Rather, all three speakers have raised very, very relevant questions. And unfortunately, these questions are not for the Chinese government, not for the communist leaders of China, not for the military generals of People's Liberation Army of China, who collectively control the system in China, who are running a business of selling human organs, like as one of you said, fish in the tank in a restaurant, that you can choose a fish of your choice and get a heart of your choice, and don't care for who is killed for it. So this is time, I think, for all of us, the media, the governments, the health professionals, and above all, the word body like World Health Organization, to think about this crime very seriously and take collective steps, because we know no government, no individual institution, no doctor, no media person individually can take on China, but all of them put together can take on the dictatorial regime of China, and we can at least stop killing of those innocent people, whether they are from Falun Gong, whether they are Uyghurs, whether they are Tibetans, whether they are Christians in China, anybody, or even those poor children belonging to poor Chinese families who are kidnapped for taking away organs. So it is a collective responsibility of all of us that we take note of it and put a united stand. So I, on behalf of Tibetan Youth Congress, on behalf of Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement, I express my thanks to all of you, to Enver Tohti, to Ethan and Jennifer for participation. And I hope we will take this discussion forward in future also. So thank you very much. And my very special thanks to Tibet Action Center, uh, Mr. Lobsang, our colleague who handles the technical side of this whole show, who made it possible that we could run this show without any interference from outside. Thank you very much, everybody. See you
Thank
again.
you.